Hey, it's your boy BT, Brendan Taylor. You're at the 5th Street Gym on South Beach. You're watching True School Sports.
Hey, what's going on? It's your boy BT, and I came here to talk some boxing with the thousands of True School Sports subscribers. Now, special video here, as you guys can see by the title. Going to be a special video here. This year, I want to make it a point to just like talk more about the history of boxing, man. Because a lot of people, we get caught up. A lot of time we get caught up with boxing today, the politics of today, things that are going on today. And I just want to, like talk about the great fighters. And I do love learning about the history of boxing. I love talking about the history of boxing. Anybody who's met me or knows me personally knows that I like talking about the history of boxing. So today's video is going to be a video that is a very it's an opinion that I strongly hold, and it's an opinion that I know that a lot of boxing fans, particularly in my age demographic, will not believe to be true because they haven't went and done the research on their own. And that's the simple fact that Rocky Marciano is a very underrated fighter, and I would even venture to say, as far as heavyweight champions go, despite the fact that he was 49-0, retired undefeated, defended the lineal crown, the lineal heavyweight championship 6 times against all-time greats such as Ezra Charles, Jersey Joe Walcott, and Archie Moore. I would venture to say that even despite those facts, he's the most underrated heavyweight boxing champion in the history of the sport. And the reason he actually winds up being underrated is the fact that, when we go back to Floyd Mayweather, and Floyd Mayweather recently picked up his 50th win against Conor McGregor, people use that, and they use Mayweather to downgrade what Marciano did in his career, and they say, well, oh, Marciano only fought old fighters. Marciano didn't beat Joe Louis when Joe Louis was in his prime. Marciano beat a 75-year-old Joe Louis and all that stuff. But they just ignore a lot of facts about his career. They don't even know about what happened in his career prior to getting the fight with Joe Louis or Walcott or Ezra Charles. So that's what this video is going to be about. It's going to be me putting some of you guys on game that out there that may not know about his career and the fighters he beat and the fighters that the fighters he beat. So that's what this video is going to be about. But before we even get into any of that, I wanted to send you guys over to a couple of interviews I did that prompted me to do this video. I interviewed a guy named Frank from Gleason's Gym. Frank has been around the sport for a long time. He's seen great fighters in the past, great fighters 10 years ago, great fighters today. And he gave me his take on Rocky Marciano, so I want you guys to watch that. And then after that will be the interview I did that some of you may have saw with Don Turner. Don Turner's worked with a lot of great fighters in the boxing history, with like Holyfield, some of the Klitschko's, and he saw Marciano. He was really passionate about me not disrespecting Marciano and the media not disrespecting Marciano, and he was trying to put me on game to Marciano back then. And then when I did my homework and I see that a lot of the things that he said was right, so watch the interviews.
What about Rocky Marciano? You mentioned Rocky Marciano earlier.
Unbelievable. Unbelievable. He had power in both hands. Guys used to complain that their arms hurt them from blocking his shots, just from blocking them. He had fantastic power either hand. Left, boy, fantastic right. He knocked Walcott out in the 13th round.
Yeah.
After he was, he wasn't exactly winning the whole fight so good. One punch, he caught him off the ropes in the 13th round, knocked him out one shot. But he had so much power in either hand. It was unbelievable. And he wasn't no real big guy. I think he was 185.
I believe he had the shortest arms of any heavyweight champion that ever lived. So
he was 187 pounds.
Yeah.
He wasn't no like these guys too.
It's like a cruiserweight, basically.
Yeah, I guess so. I don't know how we would have fared today. These guys are like 230, 240.
Yeah.
But I still think he would have held his own, believe me.
He was very well conditioned. That was one thing. Conditioning.
He went trained for a fight. He left his wife home for 3 months. He wouldn't go see her. Nothing but dedication to fight. Nothing.
Man. Well, thank you, Frank, for your time. I appreciate you. All right.
What's your name?
Ask Marciano Klitschko.
Yeah, Marciano Klitschko.
Marciano Klitschko? Klitschko, man.
Get the fuck out.
Why not? Tell me why. Tell me why.
First of all, Klitschko can't punch down.
Okay.
And Marciano is here. And when he hits you, it's over. How did Bird beat Klitschko? He's a little guy.
How did Bird?
Yeah, how did Bird beat?
He beat Vitaly Klitschko though. Which Klitschko are we talking about?
Don't matter which one.
They're different fighters though.
Both of them could get in the ring with Marciano at the same time, and he'd knock him out.
I feel you. I feel you.
Both. I used to train both the Klitschko.
Okay. What were they like back then when you trained them? Like if you were to compare like Vladimir Klitschko and Vitaly back then to like maybe like Holyfield when you worked with them, like what would you?
Holyfield was a better fighter.
What made him a better fighter? Exactly, like what in his skill set?
He fought. Them guys didn't fight, man.
Yeah.
Lennox Lewis, all them guys that come after Marciano. You know how come Ezra Charles retired?
Are you retired?
I mean, the reason he started being a losing fighter. If he had never fought Marciano, he would have been all right. After the first Marciano fight, he went the distance.
Yeah.
Got beat up bad, man. And Ezra Charles was an all-time great. Got beat up real bad.
By Marciano.
Marciano was the hardest puncher I ever seen.
Many people that I met that actually watched him fight or were that around Marciano, they often tell me that he was the most conditioned fighter that they had ever seen.
He was. Unbelievable. 8 months in the training camp.
Dang.
He didn't care.
It was his life.
He could fight, man.
Yeah.
Don't go by what these people tell you. I was there.
Oh, that's why I'm asking you. Enlighten me.
Klitschko, first time he hit him, it's over.
That's
He
it.
punched harder than any heavyweight ever lived.
Even harder than like Ernie Shavers, you think?
Yes.
Okay. You seem to rate Rocky Marciano very highly because like a lot of people will say like he fought these guys when they were old and he didn't fight nobody. Like what do you like say to people who say that about Marciano?
He started old. Marciano started, he was 25 when he started.
Yeah. People don't talk about that though. They only talk about when he fought Lewis and.
He was 25 when he started. He was old when he fought them guys.
Yeah. It's a good point.
He could fight, man. He was old. He turned pro when most guys is finished as a heavyweight.
That's true, 25.
Yeah. Believe me, if he thought he could keep winning, he fought Don Cockell and he looked ordinary. He said, this is it.
And that was it. All right, I'm gonna let you go, but I wanted to ask you before you.
What's up, man?
Lovely to see you. Lovely to see you. You gonna be out here in front
I'm
of
going in there.
Just in case. Oh my God.
Yeah, I was gonna ask you though, just before I let you go. What do you think about this fight this weekend between Kovalev and Ward? I know
What do you think I think about the
that
fight?
Kovalev's gonna smash him up.
Who knows?
Because
He
All right.
should. If he don't, that's on him.
yeah.
Take two. One more. Wonderful. Thank
All right,
you so
now
much.
Don't be.
a sheep.
No. Don't let these guys con you about Marciano. He was a good fighter, man.
Well, I'm glad.
Really good fighter.
From what I've seen, he seems to be actually like an underrated fighter. People say he was overrated. I think he's underrated.
He's way underrated.
Yeah.
If you bring these guys back, put them in with him. What guy hit harder than him?
Right now in boxing,
Yeah.
I don't think there's any heavyweight that hits harder than him.
He beat you up down here, man. He gonna hit you anywhere. The guys today aim for one thing.
That's the head.
And they won't hit Marciano because he down here. Walcott would have beat Klitschko. You think so?
Klitschko?
Yeah.
Walcott, yeah, because of his style.
How come Marciano couldn't beat him? Because he's a white guy?
Nah, absolutely not.
How you doing, man?
Mr. Turner.
All right, Don, thank you.
I'm all right.
So when I look at the style of that man right there, Rocky Marciano, I think his style, or like just there's a lot of narratives about him as a fighter. Like they say, like, oh well, he didn't have defense. He all he did was punch hard. But that's not when I watch a fight. That's not what I see. I see a fighter, Rocky Marciano, who he's not. Let's not get it twisted. He's not Pernell Whitaker. He's not Floyd Mayweather. He's not James Toney as far as his defensive skills. But I think Jersey Joe Walcott said it best. Jersey Joe Walcott, who was a great fighter. Had two really good fights with Marciano, or one really good fight with Marciano, but he had two fights with Marciano. In an interview with Marciano, he said the following in regards to Rocky Marciano about his defense. He said, I quote, Marciano was an easy fighter to hit, but he was hard to hit with an effective punch. And a lot of times, you don't always have to be one of those guys that's dodging every punch, but if you can avoid the hard shots, the ones that are going to do some severe damage to you, then you got to give the fighter some credit for being a defensive fighter. And when you look at Rocky Marciano, if you go and watch his fight films, you know, he's a guy that despite being as short as he was clever. He knew how to jab his way inside. He knew how to jab his way inside and throw ridiculously fast left hooks. He would double up on the left hook. So there was one fight I watched, he fought, I can't remember the guy's name right now, but he fought this guy who was light heavyweight, who moved up to heavyweight. His name is escaping me right now, but he fought one guy, and he was jabbing his way inside, despite having the shorter arms. And then he doubled up on the left hook, and it was like stuff like that. I don't think people talk enough about when it comes to Marciano. Like, it's one thing to have power; it's another thing to know how to set it up, and he knew how to set it up, man. So just the fact that he was the most well-conditioned fighter from everybody I've ever talked to about Marciano, that either saw him train, was around him when he was a fighter. It's all been the same thing, and they said this guy was a machine. This guy was one of the most disciplined fighters. This guy knew how to take care of himself and how to get himself ready for fights. And I remember when I talked to Don Turner, and he was going on this rant about how great Marciano was. Don Turner was telling me that Rocky Marciano was spent 8 months in a training camp. So it's like, it's more than just skill to Rocky. He had a lot of intangible qualities that you don't necessarily see in the ring, but they do matter. Discipline, you know, as far as his measurement of distance. I mean, go watch the first Walcott fight when he was down on the card in the 13th round. You know, the reason he landed that shot that put Walcott out in the first fight was a byproduct of him understanding distance. And a lot of times too, if you go watch Marciano's earlier fights, you know, he used to load up on a lot. He would always load up on a lot of punches because he had great power, he had fantastic conditioning, and that's how he overwhelmed guys. But the further you get into his career, the more you see that this was a guy that, you know, as far as balance goes, his balance improved. The way he used to pivot improved. He was shorter, so he used to do a lot of dipping that we see with fighters like Joe Frazier and Mike Tyson. And Mike Tyson watched a lot of Rocky Marciano, so you know for a fact, if you go watch some Rocky Marciano fights, you'll know that Mike Tyson watched them because you'll see how Rocky Marciano is fighting. So people don't want to give him his just due. I mean, yeah, he was 49-0, and yeah, we talk about him because his record forces us to talk about him, but his career is not looked at in its proper context, and I think his style has a lot of underrated elements to it. The fact, because like there's plenty of guys who are even big fighters. Like you look at someone like I'm trying to think of a name, a guy I can think of, but like I'll give you an example. Vitaly Klitschko was knocking dudes out left and right? But he had fights in his career, and even Vladimir had fights in his career where they didn't know how to use that power if they were fighting guys who were like shorter than them. Look at when Vitaly fought Chris Burr. Chris Burr was a smaller heavyweight who was slick and knew how to move, and Vitaly really only knew how to land punches one way, which was to measure you up with the left hand and line you up with the right, and like it's pretty basic stuff. But he was good at it. But if you could get past that, you could beat a Vitaly Klitschko. But see, Marciano wasn't like that. Marciano obviously his objective was to crowd you, to get on the inside and to wear you down and let that supreme conditioning that he puts in the gym take over in the fight. But he had more ways he could land his knockout punches. You know, whether it be via measuring with the left, landing with the right. He could crowd you. You know, he did a lot of dipping. So like when he would get on the inside, he would dip using a lot of hip movement, and then he was able to pivot either on the inside or outside. So if he's throwing a hook if he's throwing, let's say he was an orthodox fighter, so if he's throwing a right hook, he might dip from his left to his right, and then boom, he's pivoting with the opposite foot. So he had that going for him. The fact that when he dipped using the hip movement, it allowed him to pivot into those power shots, and the later his career went, the better his balance got to land those shots, and the better his mechanics got. The same things us as fight fans would praise Mike Tyson for, or a Joe Frazier for, or like someone like I don't know if he was able to do it, like an Anthony Joshua, even though he doesn't fight like that. The same things like Tyson and Joe Frazier got praised for, as far as the pivoting, as far as the leverage they get on their shots. Marciano was doing the same thing when he was fighting, but you don't hear that talked about, and I think that's a crying shame because the guy, Marciano will tell you himself. Marciano will tell you himself that he learned a lot of his style as far as when he would crowd guys and he would dip his hips and then he would pivot on his hooks and get the leverage and you know, snapping his shoulder. He learned a lot of that watching Jack Dempsey. Jack Dempsey was a personal favorite of Rocky Marciano's. So that's my style breakdown of him. When I watch him, that's what I'm seeing in the ring. I'm seeing a guy that isn't as, you know, aesthetically pleasing as Muhammad Ali. Maybe he's not as aesthetically pleasing as Larry Holmes, but he's someone who's just in his own way equally effective, in his own way equally intelligent, and in his own, you know, in his own way just as great. And the resume, which we're about to get into, proves that.
Round 13 open. Walcott was clearly ahead, setting up this stunning finish.
Marciano was short with a left jab aimed at the head. Marciano digs the left hand to the pit of the stomach of Walcott. Walcott backing away now. Here's Marciano moving in on him again. Walcott feinting the left hand, going into a shuffle. Marciano pulling his way in close. Walcott aids his legs. Keep taking him back out of trouble whenever he gets into it. Marciano pulling his way in close. Walcott is back to the ropes. Takes it right to the jaw. Walcott is staggering and helpless on the ropes with right to the jaw. Walcott is... And they're counting over him. It may be a knockout. I don't think Walcott can get up. It's going to be a knockout for Marciano. Rocky Marciano by a knockout. A straight right hand punch to the jaw. And Walcott rolls over. He's still out cold. It is a knockout.
Alright, so we've seen that, you know, I just told you guys about his style, like what I thought about it, and as far as his resume goes, his resume, as far as I'm concerned, in the heavyweight division, it's just as good as anybody's, and I would even say it's just as good as Muhammad Ali, and some of you guys might think that's crazy, but he beat 3 fighters. Let's start with the obvious. He beat 3 fighters, one being Joe Louis, the other being Ezra Charles, and the other being Archie Moore. Those are 3 fighters that are on many boxing historians' pound-for-pound lists or top 100 lists. Those guys are top 10, 15 fighters, and he beat 3 of them. So he beat 3 all-time great fighters. And when you're looking at a fighter's resume, that's the first thing you look for. How many great fighters did they beat? Rocky Marciano beat 3 of them. Now, we're going to get into those wins and the context of those in a second. But I wanted to talk about just his career, just go chronologically, because there were fights that happened before any of those fights that were just as important, that molded him to get through those big fights against those other guys that I named. So, we just want to go through his resume because it's quite a resume. So we'll start on his 25th fight. Rocky Marciano fights a guy by the name of Carmine Vigo. And he wound up beating Carmine Vigo. You know, Vigo was a tough contender. Never cracked the top 10 of the heavyweight rankings, but still a tough fringe contender that was on the come up in New York. And Vigo, you know, that was a fight where Rocky, earlier in his career, you know, he got tested. He got hurt a couple times in that fight. And at that point in his career, Rocky Marciano was on record saying that the Carmine Vigo fight was the toughest fight of his career because it forced him to go to another level. It forced him to dig deeper than he ever had to dig in his career before. So Vigo, yeah, definitely a game opponent. That was a fight where he stopped Vigo in the 6th round. He stopped Carmine Vigo in the 6th round, but it wasn't just a regular stoppage. He really hurt this guy. He put Carmine Vigo into a coma. Carmine Vigo had to get rushed to the hospital, and they said he only had a 50% chance of living. Luckily for him, he did live, but after that, he retired and he never boxed again. So Rocky took a tough contender who had a lot of hopes and dreams, and he's crushed their dreams in the 25th fight. Damn near ended his life. So that should go to show you right there what kind of destructive force this man was in the ring. He was a very gentleman outside the ring. I love Rocky Marciano. Classy guy outside the ring, but as far as who was in the ring, one of the toughest sons of guns in the history of boxing. So that's where it starts for me, his career. And then, you know, as you go on in his career, and you start learning about the other fights that he had. You know, he fought. I would say his best win outside of the 3 all-time greats that he beat. He fought a guy by the name of Rex Lane. Now Rex Lane, to a much greater extent than Carmine Vigo, was a heavyweight contender. You know, world rated, definitely in the top 10. He fought Rex Lane in 1951, and when he fought him in 1951, you know, Marciano was not a proven commodity yet. The jury was still out on Marciano, so he had to prove himself. You know, a lot of guys back then who watched boxing said that they didn't think Marciano had what it took to be a heavyweight champion. So the Rex Lane fight for him was the first real test in his career where he was up against it. Rex Lane was coming off of some great wins. You know, he had just beaten he had just upset Jersey Joe Walcott in the previous year. Walcott was a 5-1 favorite. I don't think we need to go into how great Walcott was. Walcott, one of the best heavyweights in the history of boxing and of his era. So he beat Walcott. That wasn't expected. That was a great upset victory. Then it positioned him to get the fight with another guy, but that isn't quite the name of Walcott is, but still a very dangerous fighter. He fought a guy in 1951 by the name of Bob Satterfield, and Bob Satterfield was a fighter out of Chicago. Very crowd friendly style. Had ridiculous knockout power. He was actually rated the number 58, the 58th hardest puncher in the history of boxing by Ring Magazine in 2003. So Bob Satterfield was ranked the 58th hardest puncher by Ring Magazine in 2003. But this was a guy in Satterfield, who was a very, very dangerous fighter. Like, you guys might not know the name, but I would implore you to please go do your homework on Mr. Bob Satterfield. The guy was a very dangerous fighter. He did a campaign at light heavyweight. He was a highly ranked light heavyweight fighter. Then he moved to heavyweight. He was a highly ranked heavyweight fighter. And just to illustrate to you guys how good of a fighter Bob Satterfield was, like, Bob Satterfield was a 9-5 favorite over Rex Lane when they fought, because they fought in 1951. So he was a 9-5 favorite over Rex Lane, and when they fought before their bout. And what happened in that fight was, it was a relatively, short fight. I believe Rex Lane stopped Satterfield in the, I'm going to say, the 8th round. Rex Lane stopped the fight, but he had to overcome a lot of adversity because Satterfield was one of those classic, like, punchers, like, Satterfield was one of those classic punchers that he had the power, but he didn't have a great chin. He kind of was like Tommy Hearns and Bob Fosh, He wasn't like a tall fighter like that, but he had like tall man syndrome, I'm talking about like the guys that could punch, but the guys who didn't have the best chins. So he got knocked out a bunch of times in his career, but he still, on his night, was a dangerous, dangerous fighter for anybody in the division. And he's probably one of the greatest fighters that ever won a world title. Satterfield, if you go and do some research about him, he was a ladies' man. He loved women, and women loved him, and that's what he spent a lot of his time doing. So Satterfield he never fulfilled his potential. But still, when he fought Rex Lane, that was a fight where Rex Lane was an underdog, and Rex Lane positioned himself to get a Marciano fight because he was beating these guys. He was beating the Satterfields, he was beating the Walcotts, and he got knocked down early in the very first round, I believe it was, because Satterfield was known as a fast starter. But he weathered the storm. He stayed composed, and in the 8th round, he eventually got Bob out of there, and that's what it was. But like, as far as Bob Satterfield goes, like, Bob Satterfield, he had a couple good wins in his career. I believe he beat Walcott, or no. No. He didn't beat Walcott. Bob Satterfield's best win was when he fought Cleveland Williams. You guys may remember the big cat Cleveland Williams. Cleveland Williams is most known for fighting Muhammad Ali, and Muhammad Ali put on a boxing masterclass against Cleveland Williams. But Cleveland Williams was a very tough heavyweight. Like, the guy, probably you would say is consensus top 75 heavyweight all time. I know he's been ranked by many publications as one of the top 50 hardest punchers of all time, and he was, in his day, really tough fighter. They fought each other when they were both young, really, really young. Satterfield fought Williams. Let's see what year? 1953. They fought each other, and when they fought each other, Bob Satterfield knocked Cleveland Williams out in the 3rd round. So, even the guys that fought the guys Rocky Marciano was beating were good. Like, that should tell you enough right there about how deep the heavyweight division was back in those days. And yeah, so when Marciano fought Rex Lane was a fighter who was coming off of 2 of the biggest wins of his career, along with a couple other stay busy wins. So he had a lot of wins. He had a lot of confidence coming in, and Marciano was able to dethrone him, to get him out there in the 6th round. And to me, I think that's a win that I never hear people talk about. Like, I never even, maybe I have to go watch more videos, but like Bert Sugar's a boxing historian. I've never seen Bert Sugar talk about this win. And Rex Lane, from everything I've gathered, he had a couple of gift decisions later on in his career, but he had a couple quality wins as well. And at the time that Marciano fought, hold on guys. At the time that Marciano fought him, he was definitely a worthy opponent. So yeah, that's that. Now I want to get into that's probably the best win that he had outside of the all three other great fighters he beat. So definitely Rex Lane was a good fighter that Marciano beat. What I really wanted to get into also was, because I've always heard this narrative that Marciano fought Joe Louis and Joe Louis was old and Joe Louis was garbage and Joe Louis was this and Joe Louis was that. So you know what? I went and I did my homework and I wanted to see, like, look, was Joe Louis garbage? Was he all the things he said he was? Because I do know that, for myself, without even doing a little research, I do know that Joe Louis was, 1, he was the betting favorite going into that fight. 2, he weighed roughly 30 pounds more than Marciano. So I've always got those points up, but I've never looked beyond those little points, those little things that I knew. But I did that recently, and come to find out, Joe Louis was far from washed up when he fought Rocky Marciano. I mean, and all you gotta do is go look at his last 4 or 5 fights before he fought Marciano. This dude Joe Louis fought, so in 1951, Joe Louis fought Lee Savold. He fought Lee Savold, and for those of you who don't know who Lee Savold was, he was another guy that didn't win the heavyweight title, but like back in those years, like many other fighters, he was championship caliber material. If there was 4 belts in that era like there is now, he would have been a world champion. But there weren't 4 belts in that era. There was 1 belt in that era, and he was just one of the highly rated contenders. And prior to their fight in 1951, Lee Savold fought. Or no, was it 1951. Lee Savold fought Joe Louis, and Marciano was a champion, and then Louis was the #1 contender, but then Lee Savold was the #2 contender. So they fought each other, and Joe Louis had a relatively easy night to work with him. He even said that I believe Joe Louis might have even said that like Lee Savold's power didn't bother him or nothing like that. He made relatively easy work with the guy, and this was right before the Marciano fight. This is the fight that he won to get the Marciano fight. So I don't get where people get off saying, oh well, Louis was old and Louis was this and Louis was that. He still had something left in the tank when he fought Marciano. He wasn't the Joe Louis of maybe 4 or 5 years prior to that, but he was still a game tough champion that was there to win. So there's that. And then before the Lee Savold fight, this was probably like 2 or 3 fights before the Lee Savold fight, he fought Jimmy Bivens. And Jimmy Bivens was a Hall of Fame fighter. Jimmy Bivens was a guy that, in his career, he beat the likes of Ezra Charles, and he beat the likes of Charlie Burley and some of the great black fighters of that era. He beat them. Now, granted, I want to be fair. Jimmy Bivens when Joe Louis fought Jimmy Bivens was probably 4 or 5 years past his prime. But Jimmy Bivens, at the same time, was a fighter that was still, you know, he was winning, he was looking good, Hall of Fame fighter. So you can't just disrespect Jimmy Bivens like that. So if Louis can go on a 5, I believe it was a 5 or 6 fight win streak before the Marciano fight, and he's beating the likes of, yes, albeit a past his prime Jimmy Bivens, but still a game Jimmy Bivens, and then Lee Savold, who was the best contender in the division outside of himself. How the hell can you say that he was washed up? How can you say that he wasn't like a worthy opponent? Like, and I came to find this out recently, and it really pissed me off because people always talk about how bad Marciano's resume is because he fought this guy who was old and that guy was old, and then when you go look at the guys who they say were old, it turns out they actually earned the damn fights by beating the other top contenders. So I don't get it, man. I mean, this guy Rocky Marciano, he fought Joe Louis. Joe Louis was a 6-5 betting favorite. Joe Louis was 30 pounds heavier. Joe Louis was the A side in the fight because he got paid what, $132,000. Rocky only made $44,000. I mean, I don't get it. And then come to find out, if you guys go look, there's an interview on YouTube where Rocky Marciano basically states that Joe Louis told him, and this interview that he did was done in 1958, so you guys can go look it up. I think the title of the video is Rocky Marciano 1958 interview or something like that. He basically said that, and I'll read the quote verbatim because I wrote it down. He said, Joe Louis told me that I was the hardest puncher he had ever fought. And Joe Louis was a guy that fought the best of the best. He fought, you know, the likes of Max Schmeling. He fought, He fought a lot of great fighters. Joe Louis fought a lot of great fighters. He's one of the best heavyweights of all time. So for Marciano to be the hardest punch he ever fought, that's not no small accomplishment. I think we need to recognize that. Like I think it's time to start recognizing this man. Like this is a man that turned pro at 23 years old. Like most guys when most guys turn pro, right? Like I'll give you an example. Josh Kelly is a boxer right now that a lot of people, particularly in the United Kingdom, are high on right now because this is a guy that had a great Olympic career. He's got a lot of tools in his skill set. He had a long and extensive amateur career, but he turned pro at 23. Marciano turned pro relatively like 23 years and about 5 or 6 months old. So he did that, but the difference between him and a guy like Josh Kelly is he did that and he only had 13 amateur fights. So it wasn't like he had this whole ridiculous amount of experience. He actually had to do a lot of on-the-job learning, and he was still able to win, and he was still able to be victorious, and he beat great fighters along the way. And you know, a lot of times in boxing we talk about like late bloomers and guys who start boxing late, like the guys like Carl Froch who started at 25 years old, or like Bone Crusher Smith who started at 28, or Ken Norton who started like 24 years old, whatever it was. You know, Rocky Marciano is probably the greatest example of what a late bloomer in boxing looks like. I mean, he had the best career of any guy. Of all the late bloomers, quote-unquote, in boxing, he had the best one, probably out of all of them, because he was undefeated champion, lineal heavyweight champion, defended the lineal heavyweight championship 6 times against some of the best fighters ever put on a pair of boxing gloves. So, as far as I'm concerned, his resume, Rocky Marciano's resume, for me, if I was making a list of top 100 fighters, his resume, based on what I've researched and what I've learned about him, it's enough to get him into the top 25 all time, and there's no way about it. I mean, this is a man that fought at heavyweight. He was no bigger than a cruiserweight. He was a small. If he fought today, he'd be a small cruiserweight, and he was fighting guys 20, 30 pounds bigger than him, and he was knocking them clean out. And those guys he was knocking clean out that were 20 to 30 pounds bigger than him weren't just like your average D, C level fighters. These guys that he was knocking clean out were basically like, I'm gonna say like some of the best fighters of all time. So that's my breakdown on this resume. I would say like there was those 4 guys, and then there's another fight I want to get into right after in the next segment. So stay tuned for that.
Some of your critics say that Dempsey or Lewis at their prime could probably have beaten you because of your wide-open style, despite the fact that you are very powerful. This is purely a theoretical question. Do you think you could have taken those boys?
I really don't know. I have read so much about Dempsey that I regard him as the greatest. I heard and read and have been told what a great puncher he was and what a tiger he was in the ring. With Lewis, I fought Lewis, maybe a little late in his career, but I did receive a tremendous amount of credit from Joe. Lewis told me that I punched harder than any man he had ever fought, and with a left hand, I was a deadly puncher, something no one else had ever mentioned. I actually knocked him out with a left uppercut, a very good punch that I had. I know one thing. I know that if I was in the ring with Dempsey or Lewis in their prime, that both of them would have been in for the roughest fight of their lives.
Well, Rocky, another question which comes to mind. You say you are not saying positively you won't come out of retirement, but I understand you've had some pretty good offers lately and some pretty tempting offers to get back in the ring just one more time. How about that?
Yes, that's very true. In fact, I'm having trouble sleeping nights thinking about all that money that they're offering me. I never expected or realized that I would be offered over $1,250,000 to have one fight. Because when I started, I liked fighting so much, I fought for nothing. Absolutely nothing. But I made up my mind. My plans while I was fighting were to retire, undefeated if I could. And when that time came, when I thought I had what I wanted out of boxing, or in boxing, I wanted to spend more time with my family, which I am now doing in Miami. I'd like to say this, that my plans haven't changed from the day I announced my retirement, even with this big amount of money being put in front of me.
You think you could whip yourself back into shape to be the old Marciano of old?
I think that if I wanted to put in the time and the effort, and what was once a pleasure would now be a lot of hard work for me, I think that I could whip myself into a #1 condition.
Rocky, another question. You know, Joe Louis is having pretty rough these days, and you said you admired him a great deal. They say if he lives to be 100, he'll still be paying income taxes to the government. Do you think the government ought to settle their dispute with Joe on his back income taxes?
I don't know all the facts, Joe, but I do know this. That I know that they humiliated and made sort of a big joke out of once was a great champion. A fellow that gave everything he had to the game, fought 2 fights for the Army and Navy Relief, and was just a great man. I think the government should think about the professional fighter, a fellow that has no depletion of his tools, physical resources. I think they should do something about that law, because right at this time, if a fighter was offered $1 million for a fight, I don't believe he would be able to keep 200,000 of that.
Rocky, can you think of anything that might be done to help boxing? It seems to be at a low ebb right now, and there's a great deal of criticism because of some of the people in the game.
Boxing is a sport where a fellow has to be a little hungry, on the hungry side. When I started, I actually started in the United States Army, and I thought there'd be more fighters coming out of the Army, joining the professional ranks, trying to get to the top rung of the ladder. I really think there should be more fight clubs throughout the country, the small fight clubs, where they can develop a youngster to the point of showing him on television where you can make big money.
Yeah, so there was another one that Rocky Marciano got on his resume that was pretty good. He fought a guy by the name of Harry Kid Matthews. And Harry Kid Matthews was an interesting fighter because this was a guy in Matthews that, you know, he's born in Idaho, migrated to Seattle, and then, you know, he fought at I know he fought light heavyweight, was a good fighter there, you know, kind of like the classic boxer puncher type. You know, he was actually at one point in time, I don't think he ever fought him, but I know at one point in time he was negotiating a fight with Sugar Ray Robinson at middleweight. So he wasn't a big guy. He could make the middleweight limit. He could fight at light heavyweight, but he fought at heavyweight as well. And he fought Rocky Marciano. And this was a fight where they both fought. They fought at Yankee Stadium. And this was right as Rocky Marciano, right before Rocky Marciano was getting ready to make those to have those big fights against the Ezra Charles, the Jersey Joe Walcotts, and the Joe Louis of the world. And I think this is the fight, like, this is probably one of the fights where it kind of began to validate Rocky Marciano, how great he was, because the type of style Matthews had, you know, a lot of people at the time thought that Matthews would give him problems, the kind of boxer puncher style he had, and the quickness he had. And you guys will, if you guys will watch the fight, the first round, you know, Harry Matthews was pretty much just having his way with Marciano. Marciano putting a lot of pressure on him. Matthews was patient, he was poised, and he was using his boxing skills and staying on the outside to beat him. But it was this fight where I think, it was that fight where Rocky really began to validate himself, because that was a fight that many people thought, even though he wasn't an underdog, but I think there was a lot of people out there that thought that Matthews could give him problems. They didn't even beat him, and he was a good fighter. You know, he hadn't lost in roughly like a number of years. And to illustrate that point, I want to forward you guys to a video where a guy by the name of Seymour Serkowitz, a guy on YouTube, who I looked up his channel. Well, I looked up his channel. I found a video about him where he talks about Rocky Marciano and the Harry Matthews fight, because there's really no videos on YouTube of people talking about that fight. And he gives some insight to what people were thinking about at that time, because he's an older, as you'll see, he was an older gentleman. And, you know, on his channel, he just does that with all sports. Like, he'll do it with, like, basketball. He got a video talking about George Mikan and Floyd Patterson, and you know, I thought he gave great insight. So I want to forward you to that video. So enjoy it. And then after that video, Mike Tyson giving his take, a young Mike Tyson giving his take on Rocky Marciano. So roll the clips.
Now, another fight I saw was Harry Matthews, Yankee Stadium, July 1952. Now, Harry Matthews, as I remember him, was a classic boxer puncher. He had a lot of style, he had a great positive record, seldom knocked out. And he was sort of the classic boxer puncher. And I feared that this style of fighting was going to defeat Marciano but it didn't work out that way. Marciano knocked him out in the second round, which was a real surprise. But made a clear indication that Marciano was really, really something special.
He was only there for a year and a bit, because the following year, Rocky Marciano came along. He's interesting to me because this is the first world heavyweight champion that I happened to see as a reporter. And this is Walcott. This is Marciano winning the title against Jersey Joe Walcott. There's Jersey Joe coming out. And this is the 13th round. Look how short Marciano is. He's shorter than you. And you're always regarded as being one of the shorter boys around today, but he's shorter than you.
As you see, that didn't make any difference to him. He's continuing to bore through with a defense which people didn't regard him of, because he really didn't get hit as much as everyone thought he did, because there's really no way that anyone could take the amount of punishment that everybody thought that he was taking. Nobody would continue to box if they thought that he was taking that much punishment. He was game, took a great shot, timed the right hand perfectly, and it was awesome.
That was some punch, wasn't it? If we just go back again there a moment, there's one thing I want to show you. Just look at this knockdown again, Mike, because Rocky hits him with the right, and then he hits him one when he's almost down. Now that's very typical of Marciano, I'm afraid. I always thought of him as being a dirty fighter, good fighter, but very dirty. He fought a man of ours called Don Coco, and he thumbed him, he butted him, he hit him again when he was down like he did with Walcott. So he was a ruthless man inside the ring, and yet when you met him outside, he was the perfect gentleman.
Well, in this case, you know, you're not in there to dance. The name of the game is fighting. In kind of situation, anything goes within the rules. But myself, I believe you should always fight within the rules.
You wouldn't deliberately hit a man who's down, would you?
No, not at all.
But some of these lads do, you see, they do. I mean, Rocky did. Whether it was his enthusiasm and he couldn't hold it back, I don't know. But
perhaps it was. But, you know, some people, I'm not saying Rocky, but some people are, even though they're great, they really don't know because they're not objective, and they really don't know how great they are, and they have a little bit of a little lack of confidence, and they really don't know. And they want to hit the guy and get him out as quick as possible. I'm sure if Walcott would have got up from that shot, which I doubt seriously, the punch he hit him with, the last punch on the left hook, he was dead anyway after the right hand. So there was no way that he was going to get up.
You're absolutely right about Rocky not taking as much as people thought, because Charlie Goldman, who was his trainer, taught him a quite useful cross-arm defense.
From what I know, Charlie Goldman was a masterful boxer and had around 300 fights as a professional. He fighting from Russia, I think it was.
Originally, I think that's right, yeah. But it's interesting, isn't it? A man like Goldman, you see, can take sort of raw material like Rocky, and he really was very raw when he started out.
Yeah.
And he molded him. He molded him into a good champion, a tough champion. Where do you rate Rocky?
You have to rate Rocky as one of the all-time greats because of his longevity and his record. You know, even though people say Ali would have beat him, it's yet to know because it never happened. So there's always doubt there. You never know what could have happened. You never saw him lost. You saw him on the brink of destruction, and that's what makes a great champion, when they're on the brink of destruction and they come back. It's very hard for me to say, well, he's better, he's better. By looking at him on this film and looking at Muhammad Ali or Joe Frazier on another, film, you'll probably say, well, they're better just by looking at them and looking at their folds, but you never know what the rest of the two actually mean. It's difficult to say.
The thing you couldn't do with Rocky, you could never sort of take away his heart. You see, it didn't matter what you did to him. In that fight with Walcott, Walcott was a mile ahead when they came out for the 13th round. It didn't make any difference. He got him in the end. He got him in the end.
There's something that Customer told me something about Rocky. He saw him fight the Englishman Don Coco, and he said when he fought Coco, Coco just pressed him, and he was hitting him, and he was doing well with him, and he was saying that's the way to fight Rocky. You have to press him. Which is very hard to convince the opponent to do that.
Right.
Because he's saying that's the way you have to fight. You have to press him.
The Rock, Marciano, was the most vicious fighter of my time. Here he is, finishing the brave Don Coco. And this is Marciano's fight with the wonderful old light heavyweight champion, Archie Moore. Moore actually dropped the Rock in the second round, but it made no difference. Ancient Archie had to give way in the 9th. And at that point, Marciano put his feet up and retired.
Alright, so in conclusion, Rocky Marciano being a guy that only had 13 amateur fights, the shortest arms in heavyweight history, of any lineal champion in heavyweight history, a guy that turned pro in boxing at 23 years and 6 months old with no deep amateur or extensive background, a guy that was pretty much told his whole career, even before he turned pro, that he would amount to nothing in boxing, that he didn't have the skills, he was too small. He parlayed quite a career for himself. He had quite a career for himself to become lineal heavyweight champion, to defend the lineal heavyweight title 6 times against the likes of Jersey Joe Walcott, Ezra Charles, Joe Louis. You know, to have those 3 good wins on your resume. And then you look at, you know, his win against Harry Matthews, his win against Harry Matthews, and then his win against, what's the guy's name? Lane, Rex Lane. To have so Rex Lane, Harry Matthews, and then Walcott, Charles, Joe Louis. You know, it's quite the career. I think if you do your homework on who he beat and who those guys that he beat, you know, the guys, the fighters that his opponents beat, you know, you'll see that his resume, just those 5 wins alone, Walcott, Charles, Louis, Lane, Harry Matthews. Those 5 wins alone are enough to make him a top 5 heavyweight of all time. You know, it's even enough to argue that he might have the best heavyweight resume of all time. You know, we talk about Muhammad Ali. He beat some great fighters. He beat, you know, obviously Joe Frazier twice, George Foreman in his prime. You know, he had controversial fights against Ken Norton. A lot of people think Ken Norton won 3 of those 4 fights, so he did get a win against Ken Norton, but it took him, you know, he didn't win the whole series with Ken Norton. So, even, you know, I think his wins are even comparable. Like, his top wins are comparable to Ali's. He had a better resume than Holmes. He had a better resume than I think at least he had a better resume than I don't know. Maybe you could argue Joe Louis, but maybe not. He had a better resume than pretty much all but maybe 1 or 2 heavyweights, and I think that counts for something. I think this is a guy that, because of, and I hate to say this, but because of Floyd Mayweather and his greatness and what he's been able to do in his career as far as being 48-0, 49-0, people have used that to demean Rocky Marciano, and then there's this narrative out there that Marciano was only great because he was a white fighter, a white undefeated champion. That Rocky Marciano was only great because he was an Italian-American who was undefeated. That Rocky Marciano was only great because he fought these guys when they were old. But no, Rocky Marciano wasn't great for those reasons. Rocky Marciano was great because Rocky Marciano had the best discipline of any, probably had some of the best discipline of any fighter in the history of boxing. Rocky Marciano was great because he was the lineal champion and he had the shortest arms in heavyweight history. Rocky Marciano was great because if we look at Mike Tyson, if we look at Joe Frazier, and the shorter heavyweights who also went on to become lineal heavyweight champions, they study Marciano. And a lot of things they do in the ring started with Marciano. You know, obviously we could trace a lot of things that Marciano did in the skill set back to Jack Dempsey, but ultimately it was, you know, Marciano, there's more footage available for Marciano than there was Dempsey. So if you like Mike Tyson and if you like Joe Frazier and you credit those guys for their inside fighting and their pivoting and things of that nature, then you gotta do the same to Rocky Marciano, and I don't think we see that enough. And for that, and for those reasons, you know, for the wins he has, for the limited, you know, physical attributes he had in comparison to other heavyweight champions, you know, to me, not only do I think Rocky Marciano is a top 3 heavyweight of all time, but I also think that Rocky Marciano, because of that, and because of the fact that his resume gets speaking so poorly of, you know, even not even just by boxing media, but like even great heavyweight champions himself, like Larry Holmes. When Larry Holmes was going to break his record, Larry Holmes said, "Oh well, if I fought the guys he fought, you know," when he said Rocky Marciano could have carried my jockstrap, and I think, you know, as big of a Larry Holmes fan as I am, and if you guys can see, there's a picture of Larry Holmes right there on my wall. I love Larry Holmes. The fact of the matter is, like, not only could he carry Larry Holmes' jockstrap, the odds are, you know, I'd pick Larry to beat him, but, you know, Rocky lands the right shot. If he gets Holmes in those later rounds, it's possible he can knock his block off. And that's how it was for any fighter that got there, Rocky Marciano. And if he fought any top-level heavyweight from that era, I think he'd have a good chance to beat any of them. So I just don't like how people have been talking about him. I think he's an underrated heavyweight. So I want you guys to tell me what you think. You know, it's the end of the video. You know, I presented to you guys facts. I presented to you guys like the factoids about the guys he beat, when he beat them, how he beat them, who they beat. Put you guys on game to some fighters you may have not known about, that you should go learn about if you don't know who they are. Yeah, just let me know what you guys think. Like, where do you rank Rocky Marciano as far as the great heavyweights of all time? Do you think that he's top 5? Do you think he's the greatest heavyweight? What do you think about Rocky Marciano in general? Just leave it in the comments down below. You know, go like the video, subscribe, share this to all your friends out there who may say he sucks. And yeah, like I say in every video, man, you can love me or you can hate me, but I'm just a kid from Dania. So until next time, take care, guys.